Welcome to Dayton Warcry Club. I'm Warren, and today I'm joined by my co-hosts Zach and Dave. It's been a while since we've gotten together to record, and there's a ton we want to talk about with regards to the new edition of Warcry. Join us for a deep dive into some of the stats in the new edition and get some new insights into how the game has changed and how you might want to build your warbands going forward. Plus, there are a ton of upcoming local events we want to get the word out on. Hey guys, how's it going?
Hey, it's good.
It's going.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's been I recorded with Fred after Gen Con, and that was over a month ago, I think. Since then, we had a local event. I went to Nova, went on vacation, got COVID, recovered from COVID, but yeah, we're getting back in the swing of things here. And so this is almost like a soft reboot of the podcast. There, I changed the logo a little bit, and got a production note as well. So we'd like to welcome all of our new listeners on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts. Although we still primarily live on YouTube, and we're going to continue to use YouTube for the visual aspect of our presentation, we've had a lot of requests to put the audio out on a podcast platform, especially since a lot of our episodes trended an hour or more. So there's more ways to enjoy us if you just want to listen to us while hobbying, on a long drive, or whatever. So what we're going to try to do here is adjust to narrate a little bit more of the slide content wherever applicable. Does this sound like a plan?
Sounds good.
Sounds great.
So we'll cover what's happened here in the last month or so with our hobby update. So we have a lot of math that we're going to discuss as well. So we're going to give a very brief stat introduction to kind of talk a little bit about some of the stats that we'll look at and give an introduction to the spreadsheet that we use to calculate things. We're going to use that spreadsheet and some recent lists from Nova to kind of illustrate what's new in 2.0. Some of the biggest changes, and these already got talked about on previous podcasts, monsters, heroes, and thralls being more widespread in the game. We've also noticed in the data, there's some big differences between fast models and slow models. And we've also seen that there's kind of been a resurgence of good mid-range models as well. So we'll talk about all that and then kind of wrap things up. And then we'll also talk about upcoming events, because Ohio's turned out to be a little hotbed of Warcry activity. So without any further ado here, hobby update. So this was, when did we do this? End of August? Yeah, it was end of August, right before Nova.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a Warcry meetup at Epic Loot in Centerville. And we got 13 people to show up. Either experienced Warcry players, folks that played a little bit of first edition and were relearning the game, and folks just interested in the game as well. And you guys are both there. What was your guys' impression from the event?
I was very impressed with how many people showed up. I was expecting our core group plus like 4, maybe. And I brought my son, so him included in there. But there was like 14 or 15 people.
I think plus 4 would have been like optimistic originally for me, and then
I was shocked because I was expecting it to be very small and informal, and I was like, oh geez, these people are expecting me to talk about what we're all going to do and stuff. And so I was a little unprepared, but we're doing another one, and I'll be a little bit more prepared for this one. But we had our boards out there on the left. Zach, tell us about that great looking piece of GUR terrain.
Nothing like peer pressure to get you to paint things quickly. So I got part of GUR terrain painted up. The colors I'm pretty happy with. I'm going to be looking still to add some. I actually want foliage on my terrain. I really didn't want another brown board. So we're going to be adding some tufts of grass and some foliage to the trees, and hopefully build it out a little bit more lush. So I'm very happy with how it turned out. I did use speed paints on the terrain, and that took down my need to go back and do a lot of dry brushing. I was very happy with how it turned out.
So, and that was that was your terrain project, and then the next box set will be mine. So hopefully I'll be able to do it fairly efficiently, kind of like following the same recipe.
No, I can say this because none of it is mine. All of the terrain that we play on looks great. You guys do a great job with your terrain. You put the effort in, and it shows.
That's because I never bring my Shattered Stormbolt out because it looks awful.
Well, we all have the things in the back of the closet.
Yeah. Let's see. Speaking of grid-looking terrain, so I went to Nova. Thursday, I get there and I do some coverage for the competitive tournament on Discord. And I also got to hang out with Justin, the guy who won, and then also Dan, also known as the Salty Sea. Got to spend actually a fair amount of time hanging out with both of them that entire weekend. And then actually, that's where we arranged that collaboration. So the following week, I was still on vacation, but you were on with me, and we got to be guests on the Salty Seas channel.
Yeah, it was a good time. An honor. I hope we provided some valuable insights and maybe a little bit of inane chatter, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I was sick for a week afterwards, and so I actually didn't go back and listen to it for a while. But yeah, I thought I was a great time and honored to be on. If you're listening to this channel, chances are probably you've heard of the Salty Sea. We'll put a link to that video here in the description as well, though, just in case. And yeah, and we talked a lot about the results from that tournament. So some of the things we'll kind of readdress here, talking about monsters and soup lists and stuff like that, before we get into some of the other like underlying stats. And hopefully Dan will return the favor and we'll have him on a future episode as well. It's something I've always kind of wanted to have, to try to do when we got the channel started. But I kind of want to make sure that we're kind of like, this thing actually kind of took off a little bit before we asked him. And I think we have a good opportunity now. So
Absolutely.
And while I couldn't make it there in time to play the tournament, I played a narrative event on Saturday. So I played Untamed Beasts because I didn't have my models painted up that I wanted to actually for the warband. I actually wanted to play for Skaven on Saturday. So they played all right. I won one game and lost 3. It wasn't the greatest showing there, but it was a narrative event, and so I just sort of like turned my brain off and just was there to kind of have fun. One of the games I probably could have won if it had gone another turn, that sort of thing. But it was interesting. It was a lot of Warcry though. We're flipping up cards, and you could flip up a card and just kind of lose because of the way that the mission turned out. So that sort of was what it was. But it was a chance to get to play some Warcry. I had more pictures of the scenery. The TO did a great job painting all the terrain, densely populated boards there. And then talk about what else we're working on. So Zach, what's on your painting table?
Yeah, so I've had the 3D printer fired up and running pretty hot. On the left, we got a Chaos Gargant. It's these are all third-party models. They're not GW plastic. To the next to the Chaos Gargant is what was listed on one-page rules as a Cygor. Come to learn that the GW Cygor is actually significantly bigger. However, it's still pretty large compared to other units that are that you'd normally play on a Warcry table. So like the gray guys to the right of the Cygor are my proxies for Liberators, and a Liberator Prime and a Lord Celestant. Yeah, those are, I don't remember exactly what model series that is, but they're pretty cool looking. And then I have a Fleshhound there that I had finished. He might have been pictured previously. And then on the right, I have one-page rules Beastmen and a single Slaughter Priest with 2 weapons. Those are all printed up on the 3D printer, and I'm happy with how they look. They are very much not in the same vein as GW's Beastmen. They're very feline based as opposed to bovine based. So, it's definitely a different vibe. But they're pretty cool looking. They've got good detail.
So going forward, then, so you're looking at expanding out into Stormcast and Beast of Chaos. Then looks like.
Pretty much just what I could print. I'm not gonna be. These are gonna be like one and done factions.
Mhm.
I'm not really looking to take them much further out than what I've got pictured here.
Like build them, like going wide in the faction, just like have something just to kind of have it, or have it for D&D.
Well, yeah, I mean everything that I printed is playable on the D&D table as well. So nothing here is super specific to Games Workshop games only. So I like being able to run things off that are playable in both scenarios.
Okay, and then finally, what do we have here, Dave?
That is my Chimera.
So the arms race has already begun. People building monsters. We got Gargants, we got Cygors. You're building a Chimera. I think Fred has a Terrorgeist he built already, and I think he has a Chimera as well.
He also
think
has
he
a
has a-
Chaos Gargant.
Gargant, yeah.
Yep, he's had the Gargant, I think.
So the real question is, what monster are you going to build, Warren?
I'm looking at a Terrorgeist and a Chimera. I'm not sure of the order though. My project, so I haven't done any hobbying since before Gen Con. I've been completely slacking. But the first order of business is I need to actually get a Skaven warband that's painted and legal for 2.0 with the models I want. So I have a Deathmaster, and I have a one extra model I can use as a Storm Vermin, and that will be a pretty quick way to get my current Skaven warband updated for 2.0. And I think that's a pretty solid list. We'll talk a little bit about it here a little bit later in the podcast.
Hey, Hell Pit Abomination's a pretty good Skaven monster, just saying.
I think the Chimera is clearly the best one by a long shot, and you'll see that the numbers bear that out. There's I think you'd have to have a very good reason to not play a Chimera. Yeah, it's a darn shame though, because I'm so slow. Like, I could have had Skaven ready to play at Nova, and all I had to do was paint 2 models, and I couldn't even do that. And so, once we get this podcast episode done, get this kind of out the door, and I have a few other things I'm trying to do at home, just trying to like purge some old, purge some board games and some of the gray plastic here. That have to kind of take care of that as well. Then I'll finally get back to hobbying. So the intent here is to get back into hobbying to at least have like a playable warband. And then after that, there's a couple other things I need to finish up on existing warbands, and then I can start building them out a little bit more with monsters. And there's 3 more warbands I want to do in 2.0, or complete.
I've been feeling the struggle to paint specifically. I have a lot of primed and unpainted plastic, and by a lot I mean like 100 something units if you count Legion. Like I've got a lot of halfway painted plastic, and it's
I'm not that bad off, but I have probably a couple dozen things laying around that need to be finished.
I got a lot of stuff that's on sprue, and that's my big thing. Like, if I get it built in the evening, if in the evening if I don't have a lot of energy, like, and not enough to get out the paint, I can build stuff just fine. And that's at least something. And then once it's built, getting it primed isn't that bad either. And then once I get it primed, then you might get a little bit of inertia that kind of gets you moving forward, right? Because it's all about putting paint on models, and priming is the quickest way to put paint on models, because you're just blasting it with a rattle can. So that's the intent. But yeah, the hardest part is just getting started. And I got stuff I got to clear out here before I get started on that.
my sticking point is that's where I get stuck, is primed and paint, like primed and built models, and this is where I get stuck with them.
Judging from the bags of Pre-owned minis at Epic. I don't think that's a problem.
Well, that's the other thing too. I've been accumulating pre-owned minis from Epic and from Bookery as well. Because like, ooh, a box of Paladins, Snoo and Shrink, sure. Ooh, a Contorted Epitome. I know I need that. I picked up a Gorgrunta boss at Nova. So I'm picking up all this stuff because I know I'm going to use it sometime. I know I have plans for it, but I know I have plans for it, but there's still some work that has to get done, right? I have to like do some modifications on it, need to strip the paint and all that. It's this huge long process. But until we actually get working on our hobby projects, we can just do a whole ton of analysis and theory crafting, which is what we've been doing a lot of in the last month, ever since 2.0 came out and then the compendium dropped. We had all those stats come out all a week before Gen Con. But so before we get into like the math hammer and kind of look what we found in the data, we're just going to kind of give a brief introduction to the stats in Warcry. So if you're familiar with the game, you know that Warcry combat is really simple. So calculating average damage is pretty easy. You can just look at the model's strength, your number of attacks, you have your damage profile. And when we talk about a damage profile, we talk about attacks just in the order that is in the cards: attacks, strength, and then the damage, regular damage, and then crit damage. So a common damage profile you might see is 4-4-2-4. 4 attacks, 4 strength, 2 damage on a hit, 4 damage on a crit. And the other thing you need to know is opponent's toughness. And so you get a couple different values for how much damage you do versus different toughness. If you want to dig a little bit deeper into the effects of strength and toughness on your overall damage, there's a YouTube video that came out way back when Warcry first came out, 3 years ago now, from Orkhammer. We have a link here on the slide, or we'll have it in the description here, called "Are Strength and Toughness Overrated?" And he kind of talks about exactly like running the calculations to do average damage, and talks about how you get diminishing returns on strength, you get diminishing returns on high toughness. Typically, number of attacks is the way to go. Base damage profile also matters a lot, and so that was a lot of like early theory about like what makes good units good in Warcry. So at a glance, you can sort of tell like, okay, yeah, this model is better than this, even without having to break out a calculator or a spreadsheet. And so from there, we talked about you can compute an average damage for each toughness value. And so you might hear these referred to if you watch Salty C's video. He calls it DPA 3, DPA 4, DPA 5. That's damage per attack. So looking at the numbers here, right? With the top line, we have a Graveguard with Great Blade, and we'd expect it to do 5 damage per attack to a toughness 3, 5 damage per attack for toughness 4, 4 damage per attack to toughness 5. And that's easy to figure out. Again, it's there's simply for every attack there's 6 different rolls of the dice, and you know exactly what you hit on, and you do the crit damage on a 6. From there, we can also calculate an effective damage number for each fighter. So now that's a weighted average of the amount of damage that you're going to deal to each toughness. So the methods for determining that weighing can vary. You can look at it in terms of like, if you look at all the models in the game, you could determine what are the percentage of models in the game with toughness 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, and just kind of base it off of that. Or you could use simpler numbers or choose them arbitrarily. So what we've done, at least when we were doing all of our analysis in 1.0, we assumed that 40% of the models you would be fighting would be toughness 3, 40% would be toughness 4, and 20% of the models would be toughness 5. And so you take those values and you multiply them times 0.4 times 0.4 and times 0.2, and you come up with an effective damage. So looking at the sheet here, we can see, all right, a Graveguard versus any sort of unit, you can expect it to do 4.8 points of damage. Or an Arcanaut with a Sky Pike will do 4.7. A Paladin with a Star Soul Mace will do 9.6. It does an average of 8 to some, an average of 6 to some, does an average of 10 to a lot more, but overall, that weighted average is 9.6 damage. Good so far?
One thing we might consider in the future, I don't know, we'll have more discussions about this, is maybe actually pulling the averages from somewhere else or having a discussion about what the 2.0 averages are, what we expect to see in 2.0 as far as the weighted averages go. So this is something that might be fluid here in the near future, but
Yeah.
for purposes of today's discussion, we use the weighted averages below.
Yeah, a lot of folks have reported, like, yeah, we'll talk about mid-range models a little bit more here. There's a lot more toughness 4 and toughness 5 that's getting played nowadays. Remember in 1.0, that was a lot of times where chaff ruled the world. And so, essentially, if you built your warband, assuming you would be running into mostly toughness 3 and toughness 4 models, that was probably the proper approach to take. Now, whether or not that changes in 2.0, that remains to be seen. And that's probably a deeper, longer conversation to have.
Even a reasonable argument for adding a very small percentage of 6 into the mix now.
Yes, I believe so.
Very small.
More common now, for sure.
It's not unheard of. No, you have like Stormcast with shields and stuff like that.
Baron guards.
Yep. So now that we've introduced effective damage, then how do we determine what are the best models point for point, based on how much they cost? And so we use a value called points per effective damage to rate damage efficiency. So you take the points value and you divide it by the effective damage. So this flips things around a little bit. In this case, lower is better. When you look at a lot of different models, anything with points per effective damage less than 25 is pretty good. So when we look at, this is a list of all the models in the game and the most efficient models in the game. So at the top of the list, it's no surprise you see Graveguard with Great Blade, 13.54 points per effective damage. They cost 65, and on average they're going to deal almost 5 damage per attack. Arcanaut with Sky Pike, Armator, Paladin with Star Soul Mace. So 16 points per effective damage. And there's a whole lot of these that are below that 25 number. The thing to remember here is that damage efficiency is only part of the picture. We calculate average damage and damage efficiency because it's very easy to do. But you could also calculate survivability. You can take into account movement, the range of your weapons, your abilities. You can take all those into account when rating a fighter as well. But it gets a lot more complicated after the fact. So what we're going to be talking about here for most of the rest of this show is going to be just things kind of just based on just raw damage and points per effective damage. This is where I tend to focus. I freely admit that a lot of times I will ignore units because they don't do a lot of damage when they have other uses. I tend to focus in on I want the killiest, most efficient units possible, and I might be missing a few things, but I find that if you're picking out the killiest, most efficient units that are possible, then in general you're probably going to be doing okay in the game. Any thoughts on damage efficiency?
No, just similar to you. I fall into that trap of I zero in on those efficient damage and points per efficient damage numbers when I'm going to build a list. Only after the fact do I look at the other numbers. I've tried to take more of a focus on movement in recent times, but yeah, definitely it's an interesting stat. It's not like you said, it's not the whole meal. It's just one piece.
So moving on then, now that we kind of talked about stats here, let's talk about some of the major changes that got introduced in 2.0. And one of the biggest ones is the addition of monsters to match play. And then also the ability to take 2 heroes now in addition to your leader, and then also the ability to have thralls. And so monsters we'll talk about first. This is the second place Nova list. an abhorrent ghoul king, a crypt horror, a terrorgeist, and 5 crypt ghouls. And so the crypt horror and the ghoul king, they work together. There's the chosen of the king ability. The terrorgeist is in its own group, and you have a bunch of crypt ghouls to kind of fill it out. And so you have 8 models total. You have a fair number of units to kind of wait out activations, and then you can have your terrorgeist kind of go last and tear stuff up. Now that and tear units up when they can't react to it or run away. And here on the right, we show a list of these are the hardest hitting models in the game. So we just looked at effective damage and we just sorted from high to low. And here you can see the Chimera is like on top. An unwounded Chimera is going to do an average of 25 damage to pretty much any target. Toughness 3, 4, or 5. It does a little bit less to toughness 6, but per attack, it's going to deal 25 points of damage per attack if it's unwounded. And then the number 2 unit on the list is a Chimera with 10 or more wounds on it.
I find that very funny.
Yes. And then the Gorgon is next, a little bit less than that, and then an unwounded Gorgon, and then a wounded Gorgon, and then the zombie dragon. And so what we see here is, the top, almost all the top 10 models in the game in terms of raw damage are monsters, and you'd expect that because they're so expensive. But then you also look at the efficiency. The Chimera is also ridiculously efficient. 15.6 points per effective damage. I actually didn't include it in the previous slide. Yeah, I didn't include the monsters in the previous slide because when you look at damage efficiency, the monsters throw off your data so much. And so oftentimes what I'll do when using the spreadsheet is I'm just going to hide the monsters. If I'm going to build a monster list, I'm going to pick my monster, and then I'm going to just hide all the monsters and try to build the list around that.
Yeah, they are data warping, for sure. We had to add a whole classification for monsters, heroes, and thralls when 2.0 came out, and for monsters especially, it was actually important to be able to get good data. There's a couple other places I want to sort them out on our spreadsheet, actually. Just in the generic averages, I want to remove monsters and haven't gotten to that yet.
Yep, and the other thing to keep in mind is that's when you look at the damage on a Chimera, dealing 25 points of damage per attack, that 25 points of damage you remember that monsters get 3 activations per round with 1 attack each. Most other units only get 2 actions per round. Chimeras get 3. All the monsters get 3. And so when you look at that efficiency is effectively even lower because they get an extra attack. So if let's say you planted a Chimera around 3 different units, you could deal that much damage to 3 different units in 1 round.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, you're up against a bespoke warband. They're statistically one-shotting 3.
You'll one-shot everything. You'll one-shot the leaders. You'll one-shot everything. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah. And the reports from Nova, talking with Jason, he had a hard fight versus Salty in his one loss to Salty, but he dominated. The Terrorgeist dominated the rest of the games that he played at Nova.
And this doesn't even touch upon the fact that they also get to use 3 abilities round.
Yep, they have the abilities as well, and they have the generic monster triple for Dragon Maul, which pulls a unit in. So a lot of times you even have to waste one of your activations to get into range of something.
I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing TOs have house rules for no monsters, even though Games Workshop has added them into 2.0, just because they're going to be warping.
Yeah, and this is something I talked about. On Salty Sea's channel as well, right? I don't want to ban them. I want to see them in action a little bit more before kind of making that decision and kind of see what other TOs do. It might require gentleman's agreement saying, all right, no monsters. Let's play some good, honest Warcry. Yeah, I don't know. A lot of times I'm in favor of just letting people play what they want to play. But in this case, like if monsters are creating like an unfun play environment for new players, right? If it's not a good play experience, they tend to warp the game around them. Like, if you handle the monster, you win. If you don't, you lose. If that's something I don't want to promote, then maybe what we wind up doing is we wind up, banning monsters. I don't know. I still want to wait and see. And then everyone building monsters, we're going to find out sooner or later here.
It's a real danger turning into the Kong versus Zilla meta.
Yes. Yeah, monster meta.
Which something like that has its place if that's what everybody knows what they were doing. But it does add a price point to the game. One of the allures of Warcry is that it's generally pretty affordable to get into. But if you slap a $50, throw $50
monster,
in front of that
as the requirement
on
for
every
entry.
list.
Yeah.
I mean, that's going to deter some number of people from jumping into the game. So
a lot of them are also not that easy to find. I had to special order the Chimera, and I think a lot of them.
Yeah, if you're just looking locally or something like that. But and then another thing, so the monsters are one thing here, and another thing that a lot of folks are kind of talking about online, might be kind of concerned about is like soup lists. So the heroes and thralls. And so again, we talked about on Salty Thieves channel, we talked about Justin Norton's Gloomspite Gets list, how he sort of broke the game by he used a handful of Gloomspite Gets models, but used 2 hero slots for allies and a thrall to use some big, hard-hitting, tough Iron Jaws and a Troggoth to kind of back his list up. So you kind of look at this in comparison to the old Gloomspite Gets list that used Squig Hoppers and Squig Hopper bosses, and you can see the comparison here, right? The Gorgrunta boss has 40 hit points, and the Orc Mega Boss has 35. Even a Troggoth has like 28 hit points. Look at Squig Hoppers. Squig Hoppers are just a 4-4-2-4 now with 15 hit points. They used to be really scary. Now they still hit okay. 4-4-2-4 is like a medium profile, and 15 hit points is easily able to be dealt with. Even a Squig Hopper boss, 5-4-2-4 with 20 hit points.
What's about this list is that he took a Moon Clan boss. And the reason he took a Moon Clan boss is because that's the cheapest Gloomspite Gets leader you can take. So it's not even about, it's about minimizing how many Gloomspite Gets units he can take. And then the Stabbas with nets, I feel like those are just fill. He's just filling in.
The Stabbas with nets have a good ability. The Brugit has a good ability too. We talked about that. Like the list is actually really, really well designed because like he has uses for his doubles. Even though the Nettas are cannon fodder, they still do stuff.
For sure. I just mean also that your 3 power projection units are not Gloomspite Gets units.
Yes, yeah, and the vast majority of the points, right? 700 of his out of 1,000 points in that list are Iron Jaws or Troggoths. If you want to take another look at a soup list, right? The KO list that Salty played is also kind of a soup list, right? He had a handful of Arcanauts. He had 1 Mizzen Master, and they had a Tempest Eye ally they used bringing in, and then also had a Thundercat as a fast mobile hammer as well. So he's kind of doing that he was kind of doing that same thing as well, using that combination. And so, and here people are saying this is a problem. I'm not necessarily sure this is a problem. Again, I'm all for having tons of options, and I'd be interested to see what other soup lists are possible, right? If you pick a faction with a good reaction and kind of like build around that, or if you pick a faction with maybe like a very, very good cheap chaff model and you sort of build around that and then fill out the rest with some of like your best in class heroes, what could you do with those?
Sure. I do understand the other side of the coin though. There's a saying that limitation actually breeds creativity. So when everything's an option, then the meta can become solved.
Right.
You know, because if we define a Gore-Grunta boss with a Pig Iron Chop as, one of the best units in destruction,
Right.
when you're not taking it at a certain point, if you have it, it just becomes less efficient. So I think there's probably some 1.0 is way more limited and 2.0 is significantly more open. I don't know, maybe we'll see a 2.5 where they draw some of this back, but there's not enough data really yet to see if this is a problem. And usually when you have something new like this rolled out where rules changes open the floodgates, people are going to jump on that if they have the capacity to do so. And they might, whittle those options down, and find things that work better in faction. But when you have new options, you tend to want to try those new options as soon as possible.
So, I mean, and these are things, these are things that are kind of like, easy to see with the changes in 2.0. But now, after going in and looking at all the fighter stats here, let's take a look a little bit more into the data here. So let's look at the points changes. And so it's easy to see that move 3 units got buffed. They become incredibly more efficient in return for them only having move 3. So again, bringing up, so this is monsters excluded in the data, and this is all of the most efficient point for point fighters in the game of any movement. We got a couple of them there with move 4. You have a pit fighter with punch dagger from Spire Tyrants, Fireborn with Chris a little bit further down the list, but the vast majority of the most efficient units in the game are all move 3, and it's not even close. Graveguard with Great Blade, Arcanaut with Sky Pike, your little buddy the Armator, Paladin with Star Souled Mace, Frenzied Rager, who is another dwarf from the Spire Tyrants. And so they're the most efficient fighters in the game. And then when you start looking at points efficiency, you see that they're in a category all of their own. This is another area in the spreadsheet where oftentimes I have to filter out, I'm going to filter out all the move 3 models because they're so efficient that if I'm picking the most efficient models in the game, I have no choice but to take them. But you have to wind up building around them. You need ways to work around it. And so one of the things is that people have figured out is to work around it. There's the abilities that boost your movement. And so, like, for example, Ironjaw is all move 3, but they have a triple called Wah that lets them move half the ability of the value. So some of them got nerfed, like Wah, to half the value, but a couple of them are still, as written, still work for the full value. Bringer of Death from Flesh Eater Quartz. It's kind of confusing. It says rounding up, but it doesn't say anything about having it. So as written, most folks will probably rule that Bringer of Death is going to give up to 6 inches of movement to your Graveguard if you have a Flesh Eater Quartz ally, or the Tempest Eye ally, Swift as the Wind, clearly says that it can give up to 6 inches of movement to nearby fighters.
I'm really confused about Bringer of Death, in that our dice don't have they're all whole numbers.
Yes.
So why is rounding up relevant thing?
So Games Workshop is bad at writing rules. They're bad at proofreading. They're bad at templating. You look at how well Magic cards are written. They're all clearly templated. There's clear rules for everything. Games Workshop's like the exact opposite. So, as it reads, I'll just read this here. Until the end of the battle round, add the value of the ability rounding up to the move characteristic of friendly fighters while they make a move action, which starts within 6 inches of this fighter. So here you wind up in this whole conundrum, right? Like, as written, it says nothing about having it, but it says rounding up. Now you could interpret this, using a rules as intended sort of thing, saying if they put rounding up in there, then obviously they intended it to be half because Wah got cut to half.
That makes sense.
But then Swift as the Wind didn't get touched at all. So I have no idea what the they have no idea what the intent here is. If did they obviously realized that WoW was too good, so they nerfed it. Bringer of Death, they thought about it, or maybe went back and forth on it. Swift as the Wind, they may have just completely forgotten about. I don't know. But the thing is, there's no consistency here. The one thing is consistent is that Move 3 models are like, by far the most efficient ones in the game, to the point where like some folks online are saying, hey, they're oppressive. Like Graveguard are oppressive, or just having just that model advantage and just having, multiple instances of even counter being problematic.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about that, but I do know that this lack of consistency, I find this kind of disturbing.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be better off if they had some way that they would push out erratas. I'm not that experienced with Games Workshop still, so I don't know if they do something like that. But
they've done it a little bit for Warcry. There was errata to like the cover rules, and there was a little bit of errata back when the game first came out. Because you remember in the original starter, right, the cover rule was completely like nonsensical because there was like a lot of text missing. So I mean, we did get a little bit of errata there. The way that they're treating Warcry now, how they're treating it like Kill Team 21, gives me hope that we're going to get like a that level of support where we get FAQs and erratas to at least to this 2.0 Heart of Gur box set, if not FAQ and errata for the quarterly releases that are coming after that, since we're getting a quarterly release schedule and getting that Kill Team treatment.
mm-hmm.
Kill Team goes so far as to do a quarterly balance slate update as well, where they will do things like they can't change point values, but they can say, all right, this team gets an extra model. This team gets the ability to use this weapon now, or something like that. And they've made some, or this model has 2 more hit points or 1 more hit point. They will straight up do balance changes that way in order to create and promote a competitive environment. I don't think Warcry is that game that needs a super balanced competitive environment. I don't think that's GW's intent with the game, but it certainly would be nice to kind of get that level of support for misprints and just some consistency across the board here.
Agreed.
Now, if you want to see an example of this, we have a list that actually Salty didn't cover in his channel, but I got to see in action. So Justin, the guy that won the Nova competitive event, he played narrative, and he played this. He said he played this for fun, but I think he just smashed everybody with this. And so he had a monster list he was gonna play as well, but Justin is like one of the best warband builders out there, probably the best warband builder in the game. I've said it before, I'll say it again. And so what he's built here is he's taken the Graveguard spam to the most efficient, to the most effective extreme. So his list has Vampire Lord as a leader, a fairly decent leader with flying. His allying in 2 Crypt Ghasts. So instead of using an abhorrent Ghoul King from Flesh Eater Courts, he's choosing the cheapest Flesh Eater Courts hero that he can for an ally, just to give that movement buff. And then he has 9 Graveguard. So he has 7 with Great Blade, and then just to get the points, he has a couple of them with Sword and Shield. And Sword and Shield actually still pretty efficient there as well.
Like top 10.
Yeah, still top 10, because I mean they're 55 points as opposed to 65 points. They don't have that 2-4 damage, but they're still very, very good. A total of 12 models, 3 deployment groups. The Vampire Lord is pretty quick, and then you're going to have 2 groups. And remember that they're going, if you have 666s, that is a +6 movement as written right now. And so they're getting across the board, and that is a murder ball of Graveguard, right? The Crypt Ghast is going to have probably 3 along with him. Looking at the groups, yep, each Crypt Ghast is going to have 3 Graveguard with a Great Blade going along with it.
Yikes.
super solid looking list. And if you wanted to test against probably a top tier Soulblight Gravelords list, this has to definitely be in the running for an archetype. So we talked about a monster list. We talked about a good soup list. If you look at the game in terms of like the strongest archetypes, Soulblight Gravelord, Graveguard spam, this is probably a list you want to probably be cognizant of.
Good to know.
And so on the other side, though, so we all saw that fast models got nerfed as well. So they got points increases. They had a few other decreases across the board. Maybe they lost some hit points. Maybe they lost some strength. It kind of depended on the model. So I'm going to contrast this. I'm going to contrast the Move 3 with the Movement 5 and the Movement 6 models. Actually, I'm looking at just the Movement 6 models here. And you can see I've chosen all of the Movement 6 and above models, and I'm looking at the most efficient ones there. And now there's still a few of them with good efficiency that, less than that 25 number that we are looking at. Serpents have a points per effective damage of 20. Warp Grinder, Plague Monks with double blades are still pretty efficient. The Shroud Blade with swords from
Canaanite Shadowstalker.
Yeah, Canaanite Shadowstalkers. Pretty efficient. Doom Flare, Spider Swarms. So you have some pretty damaging units that are fast. So what we saw when we were looking at the data is that if you're move 4 is still kind of like the average. If you're move 4, you probably didn't go up or down in price at all. If you were move 5, you might have paid a little bit more for your move 5 models to get that 1 extra inch of movement. Once you start getting to move 6, you start paying a lot more for your movement, and you really start to kind of see it in these damage efficiency numbers, because there's not very many of them that are below 25, and then you start getting above 25. You have things like the Shroud Queen, which is probably one of the better Canaanite Shadowstalkers models. Deals an average of 7.8 damage, damage efficiency of 26.8.
Happens to be a hero compared to some of the others that aren't.
Mm-hmm.
But you did like the Deathmaster on here too.
Yep, the Deathmaster has a whole extra inch of movement, actually, and still pretty good. And the Plague Monks are good on here too, but their points. We'll kind of talk a little bit about expensive chaff. Some of these units on the list, like Serpents, like Plague Monks, in my opinion, Shroud Blades potentially, they might deal a lot of damage, but they might have a lot of their drawbacks though. They might be fast, they might be cheap, they might be efficient, or they might be glass cannons. And so, and then this is only looking at the Movement 6 models. If you looked at Movement 8 models, if you looked at flyers, Move 10 flyers, Move 12 flyers, even mounted models with the Move 10 or Move 8, you're paying a lot for them too. And so when you look at all of these numbers, you can definitely see, and there's like the different brackets. You remember how in 1.0 we would classify a model as like a lightweight, a chaff unit, or a middleweight, or a heavyweight? You can make those sort of divisions. You can almost do the same thing if you just looked at models and just divide them into bins by their movement. Like Movement 3 models, going back here, Movement 3 models are like a class of their own. Movement 4s you could almost put all together. Movement 5 and Movement 6 you could probably put all together, or maybe like separate them. And then you could also look at things that are like faster than Movement 6 and put them all in the same group. It's another way to kind of classify models just by speed, because the efficiency is inversely proportional to the speed.
Which kind of calls out to Games Workshop's stated goal for 2.0 to kind of apply an algorithm to the stats and let that work its magic. And I feel like the game seems a lot more balanced because of it.
That was in my I was kind of in my final points, right? If you look at it, the good stuff got nerfed, the bad stuff all got a lot better, and I think the difference between good and bad, there's a lot smaller distance between good and bad. There's a lot more stuff that's kind of in the middle, and overall, that's a good thing.
Yeah, you don't want people picking up your game and then being punished for making an aesthetics choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, you
If
know,
you're gonna
somebody.
sell the model, you better make that model at least somewhat fun to play.
Yeah. I very much felt punished by my initial purchase of, hey, we're gonna start playing Warcry. I go down to the local hobby store, and I was like, oh, these iron golems look sweet. I didn't know they were terrible. I had no idea. But now I don't feel punished by that.
Yep. So put another way, though, back to the movement 5, the movement 6 models. Fast, cheap, or good. You can pick 2. And I think this is sort of true for the fast models. You can have a fast and cheap model, but it might not be good. It might not do a lot of damage, or it might not have a lot of hit points. It might be a glass cannon. The cheap and good units are not fast. You can look at the move 3. If they're fast and good, you can certainly be sure that they're not going to be cheap.
It's an old but good metric or way to design things to, and build out a whole bunch of things into that metric, and it really creates a good balance. If you have the numbers right between the three metrics you're measuring, it can make a very balanced system.
Yep. And so I talked about this list on Salty's channel as well. But so here now I've updated the graph where I'm showing all of the movement 5 and the movement 6 units, and I'm looking at their effectiveness. And so the mirror blade with dueling swords from Cypher Lords is the point for point in this range one of the most points efficient in the game for movement 5 or faster models. If you're familiar, though, I believe it's also kind of a glass cannon. Number 2 on that list is Storm Fiends with Doomflare gauntlets. So even though they're movement 5, they still hit really, really hard. And for 270 points, you're actually still getting very, very good efficiency for that. And then also Rat Ogres are also number 4 on the list. So again, hit very, very hard, even more so when backed up by a Packmaster still, and have really good efficiency.
And those are very much not glass cannon units. Those
Right.
are meaty boys.
Yep. Yeah. They'll take some hits. So the Rat Ogres and Storm Fiends, they're still good. A lot of the Skaven got penalized by that. Like Plague Monks went up another 5 points. Giant Rats went up a lot in points, to the point where they're still kind of efficient. But if I'm looking at a Plague Monk, for example, if I'm paying 80 points for a Plague Monk now, it's very hard for me to spam them, and they only have 8 hit points. It's very hard for me to want to try to spend 80 points for an 8 hit point model. It's sufficient, but it feels really, really bad when it dies. It didn't feel nearly as bad when they were 70 points. And so since all those movement 6 models got punished quite a bit, the movement 5 models got punished less so, because they're only movement 5, and so the Rat Ogres stayed. And so it's my opinion that Skaven is now an elite warband. I think there's a couple of good ways you can build Skaven that are around that 7 model number. So one way to do it is I'm keeping my core of Master Molder, the 2 Rat Ogres, the 2 Packmasters that they went up a little bit in price, but that's still something you can absorb. And I'm using a Deathmaster now, and I have a Storm Vermin with Halberd to kind of fill it out. And so I have three good threats. The Deathmaster's a very efficient threat by himself. He has some abilities. He has a bonus move on a triple, and I actually have a legitimate threat in all 3 groups. And so even though I have only 7 models, I feel pretty good about this list. I've played it once before. I'll be getting together to play some pickup games this weekend as well. Not a formal event, and I want to go test this list some more.
I was just going to say,
you need a Doomflayer in there.
Oh yeah, the Storm Fiend with Doomflare gauntlets. So actually, there's another list. I posted it, I think, a little on Discord a little while ago, and actually someone else posted it. He'd been playing it as well and having good success with it. You could build around Storm Fiends as well. So you use one Storm Fiend with Doomflare Gauntlets, use one Storm Fiend with a Rattling Cannon, because I think that's the best one of the ranged Storm Fiends. You can fill out the rest of the Warband with Storm Vermin. You put 2 with the Halberd at 95 points each, and 2 with Halberd and Shield at 80 points each. And you got about 130 points left for a Warlock Engineer to be your leader. So it's kind of in flavor there. The Warlock Engineer can use lead from the back on your Storm Vermin with the Halberd and Shield that only have 2 attacks each, and actually give them a legitimate number of attacks, and they have a good damage profile. And then you have a couple other Storm Vermin just kind of hanging around your 2 Storm Fiends. So that's 7 models as well. And then you don't have the Pack Masters, but the Storm Fiends are effective by themselves. So another way you could take Skaven. I'm sitting on a couple of the Storm Fiends now, but I would actually need to get the Storm Vermin to kind of build that. But that's after I complete my current list, that's going to be the next Skaven expansion I do is probably going to be building some Storm Fiends.
Awesome.
So the other thing that we found when looking at all the different models in Warcry now, when looking at efficiency is mid-range. So if you remember in 1.0, mid-range was kind of a trap. You could look at a typical 130 point fighter in 1.0, and you can compare it to 2 65 point chaff models, and you almost always wanted to have the chaff models. The chaff models gave you extra activation. They gave you more bodies to put on objectives. And the chaff, if you looked at the old 1.0 metrics, the chaff was more efficient. It was more efficient, and you had 2 of them. And so they were just better in every way. Now, when we look at this list, and here on the table, you can see we sorted by, we removed all of the movement 3s because they skew everything. And we're just looking at movement 4 and above, the most efficient units. Most of them are move 4. We got a couple of those move 5 glass cannons in there, the Storm Fiends and such. But here, when we look at the most efficient units, we can see that we have a lot of them that are in that range where we wouldn't have taken them in 1.0. The most efficient mid-range, the most efficient move 4 model in the game is a Prey Taker with Blade from Untamed Beasts. 100 points. It only has 10 wounds, but on average is going to deal 5.6 damage per attack. So it gives it it's a very good efficiency rating, 17.86. The Pit Fighter with Punch Dagger, the chaff unit from Spire Tyrants, also very efficient. The Fireborn with Chris, a 95 pointer from Scions of Flame. The bloated one with Raker Claws. So it's a little more expensive there. We've included all the points values. But the bloated one from the Rotmire Creed, they are also really efficient as well. I almost
18 wounds, which is not negligible.
Yeah, they have 18 wounds as well. It almost leads me to believe they may have artificially inflated the stats a little bit, or to purposely make this guy good or better than he would have been. Because when you look at his whole stat line, 18 wounds, the guy's got it all. You get the Mirror Blade with dueling swords. You have Fireborn from the Scions of the Flame with the braziers. Pit Veterans with dual weapons on the list. Prey Taker with axe. Head Claimer from the Spire Tyrants. So you see all these models, 105 point models, 100 point models, 135, and they're from bespoke warbands too.
Mm-hmm.
And but point for point, they are some of the most efficient fighters in the game.
They also suffered the least from the wounds, the wound reallocation. So Chaff really got their wounds docked down. So you have a 10 wound Chaff unit that goes down to 8. It just lost 20% of its wounds.
Mm-hmm.
You have a 15 that goes to 14, or a 15 that goes to 12. It's a smaller percentage. So it did make mid-range more playable, and then the chaff, it kind of evened out the argument for, like you mentioned in 1.0, if you have 2 65-point chaff units, each with 10 wounds, and one 130-point mid-range unit with 15, like if you need wounds on the table, if you need, survivability as well as damage, there was no argument there.
Mm-hmm.
Now
The
there's,
wounds are just down across the board in 2.
mhm.
Almost all the bigger models lost 5 wounds.
It's actually something I've been really keying into on list building is how can I get 30 wound units onto the table. So it's
Yeah.
definitely something I've keyed into.
Yeah, because there's fewer of them. Yeah, there's fewer of them, and they're more. And some of the ones that are there are more expensive now.
Mm-hmm.
If you go further down the list, towards the bottom of this list, still very good efficiency. We're still below 20 for efficiency, so very good efficiency. You have Blood Warriors with Blood Axes from Khorne Mortals. If you were to go a little bit further,
unplayable completely.
Yeah, they were unplayable before. Chaos Warriors would be a little bit further down the list at 120 points. Chaos Warriors with 2 weapons, also very efficient. Not quite on this list of top 20, but still very, very good efficiency. So if you keep on going down those lists, you're going to see more and more of these models in the 110, 120 point range.
A common topic between you and I, because we've both been playing a lot of Slaves to Darkness since the update, is 2 Chaos Marauders with a flail is exactly 1 Chaos Warrior with 2 hand weapons.
Yep, 120.
The ratio of how many Chaos Warriors of Marauder flails has been going back and forth.
Yeah, I don't know what the right answer is, right? Before it would be a no-brainer, right? If you had the points, you would use 6 Marauder flails. Now you might say the right answer, and we don't know the answer yet. You find out via testing. Maybe you want to have 1 Chaos Warrior and 4 Marauder flails, or something like that. Maybe maybe you go tankier, right? And you get some more, you get some extra 2 warrior or 2 weapon Chaos Warriors.
Or you might even go 2 and 2.
Yeah. So with the removal of the mid-range trap, it's not completely gone though. There's still a handful of units that are not very good. So the mid-range models are good, but you have a very awkward range, and it's probably within this around 80 to 100 points, and they're models that are too expensive to be good chaff models. You can't really spam them at 80 points, but they have other drawbacks working against them. They might have bad damage. They might be glass cannons where they're 95 points but die really easily, and you don't want to be spending 95 points for them or having to protect them. So in this case here, we show the example. This is the Horn Shield that got revealed from the Legionnaires, and we saw this was the first model I think that had stats revealed for Legionnaires, and we saw it and we're like, oh boy, these guys are not good. 4 attacks, 4 strength, but just a 1/3 damage profile for 95 points. When you look at what other warbands get for 95 points, that is a very anemic damage profile. Now he has a lot of wounds. He has 12 wounds. He has 5 toughness, plus a bulwark ability. But at 95 points, there's other warbands are able to do a lot more for 95 points. If you think about it, that's almost 2 Arcanauts with pistols, for example.
Exactly. I actually think that this is one of the biggest 2.0 changes, is that there's a lot of chaff that went from being either decent or very good to maybe even unplayable. And I've had this discussion with Joel a little bit because we both play Seraphon. Skinks used to be the standard go-to unit. Skinks with blowpipes. I think they're almost unplayable now. They are.
Yeah.
You would just crit fish, and now they cost way too much. They are so squishy. They're likely getting one-shotted, all of them. So I mean, we've moved on to Saurus Warriors for Seraphon because I think I've painted up a whole bunch of skinks, but I think they're pretty much unplayable now. And I feel like they fall into the expensive chaff. They're just
Yep.
their damage is unreliable. They're very, very soft, and you're just going to be disappointed a lot of the time.
I don't have the stats out in front of me. How does the Saurus Warrior compare to, like, say, this 95-point Horn Shield guy? So Saurus Warriors, yeah, they're a little bit better, right? Because your skinks are 70 points, but they're just you don't do hardly anything at all for 70 points. But for
So Saurus Warriors used to be unplayable, and now I think they're very playable. And skinks used to be very playable, and now I think they're very unplayable.
yeah, they're better, right? I'm looking at the Saurus Warrior with Celestite Club right here.
Mm-hmm.
The same profile as this Horn Shield dude, 4-4-1-3. One less toughness 4, but only 85 points. So again, he's kind of in that awkward range.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't deal a ton of damage for 85 points, but he's got 12 hit points, but it's a lot more palatable at 85 points.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can get a Saurus Warrior with a spear for 90, with it, extra with an extra point of crit damage and extra range.
Yeah, I definitely think it's changed up some factions completely.
So fortunately, though, most warbands, you do have the option to go mid-range or elite instead. So if you have some of this expensive chaff, you could a lot of times you can just kind of ignore it and just kind of go mid-range or elite. And so as an example here, I'll stick with the Chaos Legionnaires. You could almost do this with one box. You're actually one model shy of being able to do it with one box. You're going to build the Horn Shields. You're actually still using a couple of the Horn Shields. And here you can see side by side the Horn Shield with the sword that we talked about versus the Horn Shield with the mace. For just 5 more points, you get a mace with a 2-4 damage profile. Now, all of a sudden, you can see on the efficiency chart here, a lot better than the Horn Shield with the sword. And then likewise, the dudes with the 2-handers, the Horn Helms with the mace, the Horn Helms with the axe, very solid mid-range fighters with damage efficiency about 20 to 21 points per effective damage at 125 points.
It's not a bad place to be.
Yeah, so the list here, you have one leader, one Ducuriarch, one spear guy, the Mutandor, one Horn Helm with an axe, 3 with a mace, and then 2 Horn Shields with the mace. It's 1,000 points. It's 8 models. That's pretty mid-range right there. You can swap some loadouts too if you wanted. Like, say you wanted more guys with axes, you could maybe say take the spear guy and turn it into an axe guy and have some points left over, or maybe bump up a mace guy into an axe guy. I liked the spear guy, the Mutandor, at first, but then actually when I look at the numbers, he's actually one of the least efficient guys in the warband. He's 145 points. I liked him because he has that triple ability where if he makes a double move and spends a triple, he gets a free attack. So I think that's a good ability. I think it's kind of cool and flavorful. But by himself, and he has a movement 5 too, so he moves pretty quick. But again, you can see you're paying for that extra movement there in terms of your efficiency.
Definitely.
You could also do something along the lines of, if you wanted to go really in flavor, you could, ally in the Centurion. And you can cut out the chaff models completely. You do something like a leader, a Centurion, and a couple dudes with maces, a couple of the Horn Helms with maces, and then a couple with axes or something along those lines. But yeah, a lot you can do with these mid-range warbands, and we haven't even talked about like Stormcast Eternals, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have a lot of six model warbands there, and they're all very solid.
That's actually what I'm building.
Yep. 20 hit points, 20 wounds each, is pretty solid. You may have to work around maybe some slow movement there if you're going to build around like Annihilators or Protectors. But even Vindictors with the spears, with a regular movement of 4 and their range 2 spears, are pretty efficient for they're not terrible for the points like they used to be. So this gets us to our final thoughts. And so you kind of touched upon it earlier, Zach. It's a much more even application of points. We talked about that tightening of variance between tiers. The good models and the bad models, there's a much smaller difference between them now. And in part because like some of the best models in 1.0, I think they are outliers or mistakes. You remember you had spiders, they were just crazy. I had prosecutors with grand blades or prosecutors with those thunderbolt cannons or whatever. They just did so much more damage. They were like no-brainer picks. And now that it seems like every model is kind of following the same rules with the points, those models are still good, but they got a big increase in points, right? You can still play a prosecutor with a grand blade, but you're paying for it now. You're paying a fair price for it. And then all the models, they follow the same algorithm. So even though you're still kind of limited with the bespoke warbands in terms of like your selection, because they don't have flyers, they don't often have like a lot of big guys, like 30 wound guys. They're following the same rules. They're following the same pointing system. And you can kind of see that in those mid-range. A lot of those point for point efficient fighters are like sitting there in Spire Tyrants, for example.
The thought I had was that maybe they tweaked the algorithm slightly for the bespoke warbands because they don't have those other options. They might have given them like a small percentage of the algorithm up, so any rounding errors might take them up where not rounding errors, but any rounding might like bump them up more just because they're so limited. And that's, I think, potentially why we see so many bespoke units at the top of efficiency lists.
Well, they might have given them the benefit of the doubt, but then you also have to consider the fact that they still balanced all of those bespoke boxes so that if you had, like, say, one box of Corvus Cabal, it adds up to exactly 1,000 points or very, very close to it.
It doesn't pass 1,000 points.
No, it typically won't be. I think maybe in some your probably build options it could take you over 1,000, but generally speaking, whoever did this,
like the one I have now, that's 1,005 points.
Oh, your Corvus?
Yeah.
Oh, brutal.
I think there's a Canaanite Shadowstalkers build. If you built Doomfire Warlocks, I think they went up pretty significantly. I think that might be an option. If you built two of those, you might be priced out.
Yeah, but I mean, overall, I give Games Workshop a lot of grief for like a lot of bad game design, or maybe not bad design, but like not really taking numbers into account, or like what are they thinking? But honestly, I really think that overall, the way that the algorithm was implemented was done very, very cleanly. And I think it's actually really amazing.
I agree.
2.0 isn't without its faults though, or without its concerns. And so we talked about monsters probably being the biggest concern, the biggest thing that we're going to be looking at in the future. Some people concerned about soup lists. If everything kind of devolves into everything is destruction soup, or maybe or order soup, or maybe some sort of chaos soup emerges or something like that. Where nothing really has any sort of like nothing's really defined at that point. Very hard for like a one box bespoke to compete when other warbands are just picking and choosing the best models from the entire Grand Alliance.
Yeah, especially with like chaos and order being so broad. I mean, I really feel like those are the two Grand Alliances that you're going to really see some danger from as far as soup lists go, because there's just so many options as far as heroes go.
Yeah, but it's potential. That's true. I've seen, but I mean, we also had destruction, right? Destruction with its not very many number of factions, we've seen actually two different versions of destruction soup, because in Oslo, Norway, there was the winning list. There was Gloomspite Gets, and it had an Ogre Tyrant in there. So instead of using Iron Jaws, it was using ogres as its muscle. Or there's other. I've also seen a few other neat uses of heroes as allies recently, where allying in a Dreadblade Harrow, for example, in Death, or Nighthaunt allying in on Vargulf Courtier to make up for weaknesses in that warband. So there's some pretty cool stuff, and I think we're only seeing the beginning of like what you can do in order to like pick and choose. Like say for example, you're playing a warband and you know your warband is weak in some way, right? Your warband just doesn't deal a lot of damage, or your warband has like low hit points across the board. Good judicious picking of allies to bring in shores up those weaknesses, and those lists that we've seen early on have kind of like exemplified that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was just say one thing we didn't touch on at all really is how efficient some of the generic allies are.
Oh, that's true, right?
The Mind Stealer,
The Myrmidon,
the new Marshal.
Yeah, I heard a
Those
lot
are-
of good things about the Centurion Marshal. I got destroyed by one in narrative.
And those are available to all Grand Alliance that they're available to.
Yeah, the Marshal is probably a good one to talk about. I mean, it's expensive, 295 points, but it fills a lot of gaps, right? If your warband doesn't have access to a beefy unit or access to cavalry, he fills both of those boxes. So that's kind of something to think about, right? Like think about a new way of thinking about 2.0, right? Like I need fighters or models that fill certain roles. Like I need something fast. I need something beefy. I need something that with efficient chaff killing ability, for example. Or I need maybe I need something with an ability like a net or something. And you have these capabilities, and the best lists are going to be the ones that manage to pick and choose to best come up with the best combination of capabilities that they can. So the other thing that folks were kind of concerned about in 2.0, movement 3 horde lists being potentially oppressive. That the strength in activations, Graveguard being too powerful. Now that we kind of we shared Justin's secret tech for the Graveguard. Hopefully we're not gonna regret unleashing that upon the world. But
You might get some angry comments from him.
Graveguard boxes.
Yep, buy Graveguard boxes. Stocks are going up.
Yeah, we're gonna get some angry emails or texts from Justin.
But and so yeah, there's concern about maybe they're too strong, right? Maybe they got buffed too much. Those units are too cheap. No one else can afford to really bring 12 miles to the table anymore. I'm not sure that's an issue. But the one thing I mentioned before was that consistency in movement abilities. I think if all of the Move 3 warbands had to play by the same rules in terms of getting additional movement, if they had to spend a triple and only got half the movement, I would like to see something like that first before we went back and revamped all the points on the movement 3 and said like, all right, yep, they're all paying 5 or 10 more points apiece. Because there's still a definite kind of meta shaping up, right? Like, where you're like, hey, I'm elite or I'm mid-range, or no, I'm a horde list. And the horde lists have a characteristic, right? The slow shambling hordes of dwarves or orcs or soulblight gravelords. I think it's in flavor. There's no more hordes of rats because they're fast now, but I think slow shambling hordes are in flavor for the game. They just have to kind of be brought back, from being able to like turbo speed across using swift like the wind, for example.
That also still leaves room for someone to discover in the meta a way to abuse people playing horde lists and capitalize on that. There's the game's pretty robust, so I'm not sure that there isn't an option that exists to capitalize on a horde meta if that is what comes to fruition.
Yeah, there's a few abilities like that, like AoE or something like that, maybe.
Like what, 800 distinct models or something right now available?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of ground. There's a lot of ground out there that hasn't.
Then overall, and then the other thing that kind of remains to be seen, we talked about the shifting away from the chaff meta, right? There's maybe fewer toughness 3 and strength 3 models being played. because of this rebalancing of things. Maybe we're going to see more toughness 4 and more toughness 5 across the board here. And so is this something? It's something we could potentially address in another episode. Is, hey, how are we going to take our algorithm and readdress it and kind of make sure that we're actually still evaluating fighters correctly when talking about what you might come across in version 2.0. The other thing we didn't cover was the higher strength and toughness models, and they have effects on reactions too. A higher toughness model counters a lot better. A higher strength model is less vulnerable to taking damage if someone counters it or those variations. And that's another minor change. That's another change to the game that where strength and toughness has kind of an effect on it.
It's also one of those things that you're not going to get looking at a spreadsheet. Like, you can't easily quantify that.
Yeah, you have to play and observe it.
At the end of the day, you still have to roll the dice.
Yep. Anything else? Talking about anything else we might have missed? Okay, well, it's time to talk about upcoming events. So, not this weekend, but next weekend, Sunday, October 2nd, at Epic Loot in Centerville, Ohio, we're having Dayton Warcry Club organized play again. We'll meet at noon. We'll probably go till 5 or 6. We may have cut out a little bit earlier last time. And here's what I got planned. So I actually started advertising this in Best Coast pairings. I'm going to set this thing up, and I'm going to try to learn Best Coast pairings, and we're going to start pairing people off. Now, it's not going to be a fully organized tournament. I'm not going to make people stay for not going to collect entry fees or make people stay for all the rounds and stuff like that. But we're going to keep playing. I'm hoping to eventually get to a winner, right? Get some people to stay for 3 rounds, maybe get a 3-0 out of this. And we have some prizes to give out. So we have those organized play kits and some medals. So we're going to try to incentivize, people to stick around and play a couple games. Maybe potentially get a battle report out of it, for the last games, slow it down and record it for a battle report for a future episode. But yeah, that's the plan for this. Eventually, we're going to keep on doing these organized play things, and we're going to try to build towards an actual tournament where people collect entry fees, show up, maybe December timeframe. And then where people can actually all right, yep, you guys have been playing the game, you guys kind of know what's going on, how we do things, all right, let's take the gloves off and really compete. So this is still going to be sort of like a casual skirmish play session. Yeah,
I'm excited to hear how it goes. Unfortunately, got roped into helping throw a birthday party for a friend, so I will not be there. My terrain will be there.
I'll be there.
So coming up in a couple weeks after that, so it got advertised. The first one got canceled at Swords and Boards in Willoughby, Ohio. That's up in northeast Ohio, so around Cleveland. There's organized play there. I'm going to try and make it for this one. So I'm probably going up on a Friday night, get a good night's sleep, show up there. That's about 3 weeks out, so I actually need the RSVP in Best Coast pairings. It also means I have to go paint my my Skaven, so I actually have an incentive to do that. I need to commit to that and eventually, get on the board there, start, meet some new people there in the Cleveland area there. And then also we don't have our next organized place date set up after this month, but a month from now. So our good friend Jolly from Columbus at Guard Tower East is going to run a 1-day narrative event, and that's on a Saturday as well. So regardless, I know you're working, Dave, but this one's a real quick. This one's a easier drive for us. We can hopefully go up there and and play some Warcry narrative event. And we'll talk about this one more on the next episode as well. He said he's going to do a tournament pack for it. He's actually being pretty open with your initial warband roster. Instead of using the normal narrative rules, you can actually build any sort of match play roster to start with. I think that's what he said. So we'll see what happens with that. So you could start a roster with 2 heroes or a thrall or maybe even a monster or something like that, and you can kind of start with that, and then they're going to just play the rounds. I don't know if he's going to be following like the core book narrative, or it's going to be just a sort of, I have no idea what he's going to do. But Jolly does some pretty good scenario design, so I'm looking forward to that.
Exciting.
So that brings us to a close for this episode of Dayton Warcry Club. We hope you find our perspectives on this new version useful. For the next episode, we're going to follow up with even more Math Hammer, and I want to get a few other perspectives on how we evaluate models. We'll also have some results and takeaways from our next upcoming event. But in the meantime, you can catch us on the official Warcry Discord. Link is in the description. Until then, I'm War Machine.
Yawgmoth for Prez.
Keep forever.
Thanks for listening. Woo, boy. Ugh.
Need some water?
I got outtakes galore today. I might have to edit out some of that.
We'll do it live.